Okay, hello everyone and welcome. We are so happy to see educators from different schools, institutions, and even maybe countries. Thank you for spending your time with us. My name is Shalala Mehmedli, and I'm one of the co-founders of STEP Azerbaijan, Society for Teaching Excellence and Progress, where I currently serve as media literacy lead. Today's webinar is especially meaningful for us because it marks the launch of the fourth season of our Informed Voices Media Literacy webinar series. And honestly, I think today's topic couldn't be more timely because nowadays our students are increasingly turning to search chatbots, AI generated content, and uh, just to search, communicate, and learn, and even form opinions. And I know that as educators, many of us are still trying to understand how do these tools shape thinking, and how do we help students stay curious, reflective, and act responsibly in an AI-driven information environment. So that's exactly why today's session matters. And before we begin, I'm also very happy to introduce my co-host and my dear friend, Dan Alexandru Kita from Romania. We both were part of Fulbright T media literacy cohort at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2024. So Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shalala. Hello, everyone, and welcome from my side as well. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation, especially at a time when AI tools and algorithmic systems are reshaping how students learn, think, and interact with information every day. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion and to learning together with all of you. And now it's truly my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker. We are honored to welcome Dan Krutka from the University of North Texas. Dr. Krutka is Associate Professor of Social Studies, Education, and co-founder and co-executive director of the Civics of Technology Project. We support educators in advancing critical perspectives on technology. A former high school teacher, he has authored nearly 100 scholarly publications exploring the intersections of media, technology, democracy, and education. His co-authored article in Harvard Educational Review, What Relationship Do We Want with Technology, introduces the techno-skepticism iceberg framework, which is a cross-disciplinary model for helping students think deeply about the human and societal impacts of technologies. In addition to his academic work, Dr. Krutka is also actively engaged in public conversations through podcasts, webinars, and online discussions with educators and researchers worldwide. We'll be sharing some of his podcast episodes and YouTube resources in the chat, so participants can continue exploring these ideas after today's session. Dr. Krutka, thank you so much for being with us today. We're excited to learn from your insights and experiences. The floor is yours.
Dr. Krutka, you are muted. You are muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, I got my screen set up here. It's an honor to be with you all today. It's night for you, but it's morning for me, and it's a Friday day, so it's a good day. Our school year just recently concluded, so it's a great time for reflection and thinking about what we'll do next. Our next academic year. So my name is Dan Krutka. As mentioned, I'm actually now professor of social studies education at the University of North Texas. I just was promoted last week, so which is very exciting. But I want to share a couple resources first as we get started. So a lot of my work that I do is done through community. I think a lot of the questions around AI and how we manage these new environments are difficult ones, and we need to be with other people trying to figure them out. So I'm going to take off my slides for just a moment And I'm going to show you the Civics of Technology website. So there's a lot of resources here. And if I can do anything today, I hope I'm able to connect you to resources that are ongoing, right? I know our best professional development are the things that we find other people to work on over time. And so at Civics of Technology, we formed this because we thought that a lot of times our schools in the United States were, you know, integrating technologies without a lot of thoughtfulness. We were spending a lot of money on to buy Chromebooks and always encouraging the brand new technologies, but not often asking critical questions about, what should we teach students about their relationship with these technologies, right? What role do we want to have? And so this is the website you can see where we kind of start. But the big thing I would say is if you're interested in this work, you might subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that here, or you can do it on our blog page, and that will keep you up to date with all our events. For example, we have a free conference coming up in August 6th and 7th that we have some great speakers. Meredith Broussard, who's written on AI for years before it became so popular, and then Natasha Singer, who's a reporter on what's happening in schools in the United States. If you are more interested in learning about any of my work, if you go to the About Us page, you'll see right here, I do have a page. I can link this for you, but it's just Civics of Technology / Dan Krutka. And this is my bio, all my scholarship and things like that. But I do also want to show you real quick that we do have free curriculum. Everything we have is free and open to use for all educators. And so we have a lot of activities that can help students think critically about technology. These are not things I'm going to address today in my session, but I wanted to make them known to you. For example, this is one of my favorite activities. It's a critical quotes activity. And when there are slides that are available, and you can put the quotes up around your room, and they have space for students to write their own notes. And what they do is they go through and think about like what these different quotes mean in the ways they think about technology. So they're meant to help you think in different ways and think through different lenses. And so all the materials are editable, so you could choose the quotes that you think would resonate most with you and your students, and you could use those. So this, for example, is one of my favorite quotes. It comes from, a lot of times I like to show this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. without telling students who it's from, because a lot of times and what time period, and let them think about it, because it's a quote where Martin Luther King says a lot of the critical things that critical technology scholars say too, and so it's surprising to see it come from him. But we have quotes that go back to the 1800s and all the way up into the present. We do have a specific quote activity just for quotes about AI. That are very helpful. For example, I added one to it very recently. Let me see. I liked this one right here. The real threat AI poses to education isn't that it encourages cheating, it's that it discourages learning. And it's the type of quote that's provocative and gets students thinking about what they mean by that. And so these are some resources that could be available to you. And then most relevant to today's talk, we do have a media literacy curriculum that's available right here called Mapping the Media Education Terrain, where we kind of explain different approaches to media literacy. So we're going to talk about AI and media literacy today. But one thing I want people to look at is that a lot of times we reduce media literacy to just finding the right source, right? That we're just looking for credible sources. That is the most traditional thing, is we're trying to identify the credibility of a source that we're looking at. And so there is really good sources for that. We point out some resources that you can use that approach, but we then also approach other approaches to media literacy. Sometimes it's not about just determining credibility. It's about, what do I do when I'm online? How do I respond to the posts and the information I see? And so we kind of have these different approaches based on different things that you may be doing with students. We have an activity on psychosocial approaches to media education, which is like, how do you get students to start reflecting on the feelings they bring into when they're looking at different media? And so these are the resources for this. Then we have what's called a more of a media ecology approach, which is more about analyzing different media forms, right? That we need to understand that artificial intelligence video can be very different from artificial intelligence text, right? That those are different ways of making media. And so it helps you to analyze the media, and we have some lessons there. And then the last one is a critical media literacy approach, which identifies power. And so there's a whole curriculum that is with it, and we have an article that you can download that goes with it. and we have an activity that goes with this where you can read about why we came up with these, because a lot of times we thought media literacy was being collapsed into one single thing. So I wanted to share that here. I'll put that link into the chat for everyone. But if any of these resources are helpful, again, they're all available. Oops, sorry, didn't grab the link here. Let me grab that real quick. Are some helpful resources that you can use in your own classroom. There we go. There's the link to that one. So, okay. All right. So with that, let me go back to my slideshow here, and I'm going to walk through some aspects of how we can teach in the age of algorithms, right? Of course, algorithms are have been a part of our lives, but increasingly, dictate a lot of what we see in the world, what ends up in front of us. And so our goal today is to talk about how AI changes what it means to access information and how we can teach students to access credible information, right? How do we work through this problem? I want to start by saying I don't have all the answers to this. These things are changing daily, and that's why I think it's so important to engage with communities working on these problems. Because even right now, for example, Google is changing the way their search engine works, and so that's something that I'll have to adapt some of my lessons that I've been using recently. So the first question, if people want to add this to the chat, if you're watching this on the recording later, right, you can take a moment to reflect on this. But what are your information seeking strategies, right? I like that term. I saw someone use that recently. So when you're seeking out information, what are the strategies you use to seek out information? Or put in another way, how do you go about finding what you'd like to know? So when you don't know something or when you have questions, how do you go about doing it? So I want to give people just a moment in the chat to kind of think through that question. If anyone wants to unmute and share too, that's okay also.
Yeah, I would like to add a few lines to what you said. So basically,
Great.
when I'm thinking about information seeking strategies, the first thing I do is to actually Google that piece of information I'm looking for, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of try to see if it makes sense. Like, for instance, if they come up with some figures, some numbers about something, I want to check if that's real. I usually go. I also use OpenAI, but I don't believe OpenAI 100%. I also go on Wikipedia. I search for all sorts of other sites, especially if we are talking about some academic piece of information. And then if I see that the topic was already referred to by somebody in the exact way I received the information, I look in the comment section below and see if there are people who share their own point of view, but they substantiate it in a reasonable way. And usually, what I noticed is that a lot of information which is dubious, to say the least, has been kind of checked by somebody before. And you
Mm-hmm.
get critical insight on that. So there are multiple perspectives which you could choose from, or at least your initial, um, or at least the initial aim of the content is kind of lost into thinking about it, in the sense of not lost. Maybe I misused the word. In the sense of, okay, somebody's trying to trick you or somebody's trying to manipulate you, but others have thought about it beforehand, and now you can double check, triple check,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And in most cases, you can actually come to um, a, a piece of information which is sound. You know what I'm saying? You need to be optimistic and open-minded. For instance, I'll give you one example. Today, no, yesterday, a Russian drone was hit an apartment building in a city in Romania, and it was, all on the media, local media, international media.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, the Russians are attacking a NATO country. That's why they highlighted it. And I searched for the whole thing, and I noticed that it's not clear whether it's a Russian drone or maybe a Ukrainian drone that slided from its initial course and accidentally hit the building. So, all of a sudden, that state of anxiety you might feel when you first read the information is eclipsed by, you know, other info, other details, which change the picture completely. You know what I'm saying? And people should always double check, especially when the information is emotionally packed, and somebody's looking for a certain reaction, a psychological reaction, which is not necessarily what you should fall for, you know. And I rest my case.
We have some comments
Yeah.
here in the chat, and also
Mhm.
one participant raised hand. Günay Hanım.
Yeah. Yes. Good evening. When I want to learn something new, I usually search online, read reliable resources, watch videos, and compare different opinions. And I also ask questions and take notes to better understand the topic. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I verify the facts before accepting information as true or not.
Yeah, I think in both of those are both great answers, right? In that we're trying to seek out information that's more trustworthy. We are trying to pay attention to our own emotions in the situation, right? Depending on where we're seeing that information, it can kind of like play on our emotions, right? So, for example, if we're on social media and everything's moving really quickly, and we're seeing something that would hit on our emotions, right? Like about an international conflict, and we already have feelings about countries and what they would do. We know that we're primed to accept certain information and reject other information. And so I think showing patience, figuring out who are people that would know about this information or that I would trust are really important, because today everyone has comments online, and right, so we have to often weed through a lot of those. So I think one thing you all hit on is if you the different media approaches, several of them are useful to what we just did, right? So again, having students check where their emotions are at on an issue can be really helpful to understanding how likely we are to believe something. But then also, what are our strategies, and seeking out, trying to corroborate information, finding multiple sources and things like that. So you all are hitting on a lot of those great ideas. I saw people in the chat saying they would use keywords and search with Google, find more sources, compare and think. Check and recheck is really important. And evaluate, assuming everybody might be lying, right? I think the one challenge with media literacy we want to do is we have to be skeptical without also becoming pessimistic, right? Because when people, and I know that Natalia, I think it is, I'm sure you weren't saying that, but when we teach our students, we want to be careful not to make them too pessimistic, to think everything online is a lie. Because once they don't think there's anywhere where you can find truth, and they see everything is inaccurate, that is also a very bad place to be, because then they can end up believing anything, right? We do need them to understand that there are people who are more likely to help us find the truth. There's a lot of other good comments here. So looking at having background information, right? Having read academic articles or books or topics is always really helpful. And so several people said they turned to ChatGPT and other areas, and it can be useful for finding initial information. We'll talk about that today. One thing I worry about with like ChatGPT, I often am interested in health information, right? I like to be physically active and work out and so on. I want to look up whether this is a good thing to do or a bad thing to do. I sometimes would want to turn to a chatbot, but then I know those chatbots are built off of the larger data set of the internet, and there's so much health misinformation on the internet. It makes me always clarify how I prompt it, right? Can I get expert opinions? Like, can I get it to draw from expert sources? And sometimes you can get the chatbots to do a better job of that. So what I want to do is show you a couple strategies that I've used I hope would be helpful. Some of these may be familiar to you. Some of you may have already used them. But first, I want to kind of frame the problem just a little bit before we move forward. So in short, I've been following the work of Michael Caulfield, and I want to put his blog in the chat if you're interested. Now, he has posts on all kinds of things. Right now, he's been playing with building chatbots to make movie recommendations. And so you have to kind of go through some posts of his to go find some steel. But Michael Caulfield was the inventor of the SIFT model, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in a moment. But it's probably the most popular approach to evaluating online information, at least in the US right now, by a lot of information literacy scholars. And so one of his main points is that information information literacy has changed because the information environment has changed. So in the past, we often taught students to ask questions like, who made this website, or is this source reliable? And those are still good questions, but they don't always fit the way information reaches students today. So many claims now about that come through TikTok videos or Instagram posts or screenshots or podcasts, or maybe they're a short clip on YouTube, or you're getting an AI summary. In those spaces, the original source is often missing or hard to see, right? We often get information without knowing where the original source of that information comes from. And so a student might hear a claim from an influencer, but the influencer may not have been the person who gathered the evidence. They may just repeating, remixing, or reacting to information that's somewhere else. And so this can be harder because the open web is less open than it used to be too. Useful information is often behind paywalls. So you may try to go to a news site and you don't have access to that news information because you don't pay for it. You can find a lot of information inside apps or buried in algorithmic feeds. And so it can be difficult to find the information you want to get to sometimes. So students may be working from a stable web page that clearly names the author, publisher, date, and evidence. And so Caulfield describes this new environment we have. Oftentimes we have a problem of fact checking the mailman. And so I have a little what a mail person in the US looks like up in the corner of my screen here. And so what he means by that is the point is that the person or the account delivering the information is not always the real source of information. The account may be useful for noticing a claim, but it may not be the best place to evaluate whether the claim is true. And so sometimes we need to focus less on the account that shared the claim and more on the claim itself, right? We used to say, is this person credible? But again, if they're just repeating someone else's information, they're not evaluating them can be a waste of our time. So we need to think more about the claim. Is it accurate? What evidence supports it? What do better sources say? And where did the claim originally come from? So these are a lot of the things that you all are mentioning. Okay, so here's a few of the other problems that I wanted to identify. AI does add another layer to this problem. Students are increasingly using AI tools as search tools. And instead of seeing a traditional list of websites, they may just see an AI generated answer. And there may be links attached or there may not be any links attached. It depends on which chatbot they're using. And so these initial searches can be useful, but it can also make the process feel more settled than it really is. Right? AI can be, an AI response sounds very organized and confident, even when the evidence still needs to be checked. And so in addition to being too authoritative, generative AI answers can be misleading by including information by problematic websites or insufficient in that it leaves out important information. And it can be sycophantic in that it can even respond to questions that humans would reject. Right? Let me give you an example of that one. So in 2021, this is a few years ago, Google embarrassingly answered with the text snippet. Somebody asked, what is the ugliest language in India? Right? So if you asked a student that question or a person that question, or say you went to a library and asked somebody that question, they would say, what a terrible question. I'm not answering that, right? But a chatbot will give you an answer to a question like that. And so Google actually answered that question and it gave an answer. It identified the language Kannada, right? Which is a language spoken by around 40 million people in South India. And so I can't help but think about how when we think about the different ways we get information, having algorithms deliver us information poses a lot of risks. And this is a good example because my wife taught in a school here in Texas who had native Kannada speakers in their school. And when those students were in her class, she ended up going and purchasing books in their native language in Kannada for them to have in their school library. And I can't think how different it is having a person who is thoughtful about information and an algorithm delivering your information, how different that can be. And of course, the kids were so excited when they had books in their native language in a school that primarily had books in English. And so the fear with AI search is that the biases can be amplified and the user's ability to recognize it can be reduced, especially if they're only reviewing the synthesized information from large language models. So in a really good article that I have linked in my comments, I'm happy to share these slides, and I have all this in my notes underneath each slide. a couple authors I really like, Shaw and Emily Bender, they argued in a really good article I was reading this morning, we should be looking to build tools that help users find and make sense of information rather than tools that purport to do it all for us. So the point being is we cannot rely on chatbots to give us all our information. And that's the thing we've got to teach students. So students are going to need new habits. They should not treat the first AI answer as the final answer. They can start by putting the claim into an AI tool, but then they should ask better follow-up questions. For example, what is the evidence for and what is against the claim? What context should I know? What evidence supports this claim? What evidence challenges it? What context would help me understand it? What do experts or relevant organizations say? Can you point me to the original reporting, research organizations, government sources, major news outlets? So there's a lot of questions we have to ask with students to figure this out. So students need to remember that source evaluation is not only about whether a source is credible, it is also about whether the source is relevant. A peer-reviewed article, a government report, a news story, a personal testimony may be useful for different purposes. So students need to ask whether the source actually helps answer their question and whether it fits the audience and the context for their work. So even then, the work is not finished. Students still need to leave an AI tool, and then they need to go click links, read sources, and check whether the AI represented the information accurately. In other words, AI can help students begin an investigation, but it never should replace the investigation. So for teachers, the takeaway is that media literacy in the age of AI is not just about warning students that AI can be wrong. It's about teaching students how to choose whether to use AI as part of a search process, and they need to investigate claims and go from there. So we have Dan, we got a comment.
Dan?
Yeah, Mr. Dr. Krutka, you made me search for that piece of information. About which is the ugliest language in India, and it's funny because I did find some sources. India's ugliest language in the New York Times. Then there's another search on Z Business and Quora. In fact, the whole topic started from Quora. Somebody asked this question, which is the ugliest language in India? Also from a newspaper, The Hindu. And apparently, the thing goes like this: beauty in language is entirely subjective, and there is no scientifically ugliest language in India. Linguistic experts and cultural scholars agree that every language possesses its own unique phonetics, literary history, and cultural richness. So you could see that the AI tool I've been using seems to be quite tolerant and open-minded about the subject. And then it highlights the fact that the concept gained widespread attention in 2021 when a glitch in Google search algorithm mistakenly displayed Kannada, not Canada, but the language spoken in India, as the answer to this exact query, and there was a public outcry. And obviously, the guys from Google swiftly removed the result and issued an official apology. And this is something you find out in the New York Times. And I think this is for somebody who just came across the topic. I think it provides enough insight before you actually go deeper. Yeah, honestly, I like if people are really open about it, and it's not about confirmation bias here. And I think this is the main reason people fall for all sorts of misinformation, disinformation, whatever. Then you could find resources online to ease the pressure, metaphorically speaking. But I think, and this is something you could also talk a little about. I don't think that, okay, there are some errors. There could be huge errors when it comes to passing information to the general public. But sometimes accurate information could be misleading because there are so many rhetorical devices used when you actually, state the issue. And there are also ideological reasons why people fall prey to a certain type of information instead of another. And I think they could see this not just all across the United States, but also, and I'm sure you know about it, in other, on other continents as well, especially Europe. So we are kind of entangled into this predicament. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and actually goes perfectly into it, transitions perfectly into my next slide, which is one thing I like to point out is that when we think about what misinformation is, it's not just about whether information is accurate, right? It's not just about the credibility of information. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail and try to teach everything about misinformation here, but I often use this graphic with my students to talk about the different ways that misinformation spreads. I just put it in the chat. But essentially, misinformation takes many forms. And today it's often not just about being wrong. It's often about the context, right? That somebody gives us information in a context that is misleading, right? So they'll post something on a chat board with a headline like "You're never going to believe what they've done now," and then they post a small clip of like a 20-minute conversation. They only post 30 seconds of it, right? So technically, the information is not inaccurate, but the framing of it can be inaccurate. So we need to go through and teach students that misinformation takes many forms, and it doesn't just mean that information is inaccurate. It can mean that it's misleading in the way that we get it. So I highly recommend reviewing different types of misinformation, and this can be a good resource for doing so. So here's another question that I'll say a couple things about how I think of Gen AI in my classes. I never require students to use a generative artificial intelligence chatbot. Because I think that's actually a moral discussion about the different search engines we use. So I always, with any technology, start with the question: should we use Gen AI for search? And so this is there's a range of reasons students may choose not to use generative artificial intelligence, and I think it's important to allow them an opportunity to make this decision. Now, that doesn't mean they can't learn about it, right? The teacher could still, for example, be the one using it and showing them and leading discussions. They could sit with a partner who chooses that they want to use it or use it regularly. And so you could start with the environmental costs of generative artificial intelligence. You could think about the labor exploitation, right? The people who are taken advantage of. Particularly, we have workers in African countries, Kenya in particular, who are often supposed to be wading through a lot of the information on Gen AI platforms to clean them up and make them better over time. You have the source displacement right now. A lot of places that produce information online, we're not even getting to those because Gen AI is stealing their information and giving it to in a summary and not even linking back to the place that they stole it from. It's not always clear how the information is formed. There's not opacity. We have bias and unequal representation that comes from the internet, can often amplify biases that already exist. We have privacy concerns about how Gen AI platforms use and collect users' data who use those platforms. We have an over-reliance on Gen AI and de-skilling. So people who rely on this too much could start to, their skills in search in other aspects of their life could start to atrophy as they cognitive offload and turn things over to AI. We have a false confidence in what AI gives us, right? That we see it as authoritative. We have to remember these are companies trying to make money. Increasingly, I worry if you search for something, they could be moving you towards advertisements and or things that they're going to profit from. And then generative AI could be contributing to weakening the web, right? The open web. And for example, on the issue of environmental issues, I've sometimes directed people to my students to this site right here, which is what uses more. You can compare the environmental footprint of tasks. So for example, we could go in here and we could pick a task. Here, hold on. I think it's got, let's pick one, quantity one, and we're going to pick our first task. So how much what's the environmental impact of a paragraph of AI text? Okay. And then, here, I just want this to be one. Here, let me refresh this. I think I messed up the search. Here we go. Okay. So I'm going to pick here, paragraph of AI text. First, for example, let's see, if I were just to do a Google search without AI, what is the environmental impact of those? You can calculate this. And if you look at the bottom of the screen here, you can see how much more the impact of the AI search is. And so that's something students should be aware of and we should show them. And so this is a resource, and there's other resources you can use to search and find that. It's also, by the way, that's an example of an issue you have to be careful when you're searching it, because when AI companies answer the question, how much and what's the environmental impact of a search, they're often only going to tell you about that individual search and ignore how much environmental impact of all training the data is, right? Which you couldn't have the search without the training data. So if you include training the data as part of it, the environmental impact is much higher than otherwise. And so I think we should start by always giving students the option about whether they want. We should think of our relationship with all technologies as a moral decision we make in our lives, whether we drive a car, whether we use AI, generative AI search, whether we use some other technology. Does it align with our personal values? And that's one of the emphasis in some of the research that I've done, where we argue that we should take a techno-skeptical perspective and not always just believe in the benefits that are promised, but think through all of the collateral, unintended, and disproportionate effects that are possible. So once you've gone through that question, and I use this is a little meme from Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park, they asked the question whether we should have a dinosaur theme park, if you've seen that movie before. And we should always ask those questions about technology. So the most popular method that I mentioned earlier that's used in the US often is the SIFT method. And the reason it was developed was because it's pretty responsive to the internet, right? So SIFT was designed for a web where users often encountered visible sources, links, and websites. And its main move asks users to stop. So whenever you come in place in front of information, you stop, think about, what am I looking at? Do I know what I'm looking at here? Investigate the source, find better coverage, and then try to trace the claims back to the original context. And so this assures that source evaluation is often an early and useful step. The SIFT method can be very good. It's not a series of steps that you just go 1, 2, 3, 4. It's things that are kind of iterative that you go through over time. I'm not going to try to teach the SIFT model, but the best thing I can tell you is if it's a good model to use, but what you should do with students is practice it over time. Do it many times. You get better with SIFT as you do it a lot of times and you think through it. And there's a ton of tutorials online to learn how to use the SIFT method. So the SIFT method worked pretty well for searching things like Google. All right. But Michael Caulfield has come up with a new model for SIFT, and it's really his SIFT for AI model, which was his argument is that this new model, SIFT for AI, responds to a newer environment where students often encounter claims that are linkless, right? They're seeing something on social media, a claim, but they don't have a link to look at anything. They may see, it may be a video, it may be an AI generated summary. And so he argues that the sharing sources part is often less useful now because it may only the place where they're getting the information, they may just be like the delivery mechanism, right? So SIFT for AI begins more directly with the claim or question. So as users, what he argues is that if users want to use AI to search, what they need to do is get their claim into, for example, an AI chatbot, and then they need to ask evidence for follow-up questions, find better sources, and leave the AI tool to go check those sources, right? Get out of it. So in brief, SIFT starts by helping students evaluate visible sources and coverage on the web, but SIFT for AI helps students use AI to investigate claims and locate better sources while still requiring them to verify information. All right. So this is his new model. I've got links for all of this if you're interested in learning more about it. But he argues this works a little better because it doesn't rest so much on assuming that the place where you got the information actually is where you should investigate further. Okay, so what I want to do is show you an example of how I use this with students, all right? If you want to, I created a little worksheet. It's super simple that you can download and use with your students and you could adapt it. But essentially what I challenge people to do is compare doing a Google search to doing a chatbot search, and looking at what is similar and what is different in those two searches and getting students to start reflecting on it. Now, by the way, you wouldn't even have to stop there. You could actually have students also go ask a librarian about a question and see how they help you get the information. There's lots of other ways besides Google search and AI modes to get information, right? But I'm using these two because these are kind of our two ones that are the most dominant modes people often use to search for information now. So as we go through, what I want you to do is if you want to, you can use this while I'm doing this, but we could also think through it in this example we're about to do. So again, if you wanted to pull this up, you could actually type out answers while I'm doing a search here in a moment. Okay, so let me show you how I use this. So I teach a class, which is our elementary social studies methods class at my university. So I'm helping to prepare elementary social studies teachers to teach kids, young kids, about history. And so one of the things we often do is we often use picture books to teach kids about history. But what if you were reading a picture book as a teacher and you're not sure whether the information is correct in it? Is this accurate? Is the picture book author actually telling the story correctly? So this is a picture book page I used in my class. It's a story of Frederick Douglass. I don't know how many people are familiar with Frederick Douglass. He was an abolitionist in the 1800s in the United States. So he was previously enslaved and he escaped enslavement, and then he fought to end slavery in the United States, and he became, involved in all kinds of movements. He fought for women's rights to vote and all kinds of things in the 1800s. So we read a picture book. This is one page of that picture book. Okay, so if I'm a teacher and I'm reading this picture book, you can see we could actually read this page together real quickly and look at the information it's presenting us, and then think about, okay, I'm a teacher that has like 5 to 10 minutes. Right? That's all a teacher could probably afford to think about. Is this accurate? Is this story accurate? And so I'm going to show you the difference between doing this on Google or doing this with an AI chatbot and see how the information comes up. So here, let's look at this page of this picture book together. It says, I'll go ahead and read it to you like I would to my students. In September 1838, Frederick made his move. Using the seaman's papers of a free black sailor and dressing like the sailors he saw on his job, he boarded a train headed north. I suppose you have your free papers, the conductor asked him. No, sir, I never carry my free papers to sea with me, Frederick said. Here are my seaman's papers. The conductor looked at the papers. You don't sound as if you're from around here, he said. I haven't been around here much, Frederick said, holding his breath. The conductor gave Frederick a hard look and then accepted his fare. I don't think you'd like it very much in these parts, he said. After the train ride, Frederick took a ferry across the Susquehanna River into Pennsylvania, and then he took another train into New York City. Frederick arrived at the home of an abolitionist whose name he had been given. Sir, I can use some help. Frederick was almost trembling as he spoke to the man who answered the door. Come in, the man said. You've come to the right place. Frederick entered the house and breathed a sigh of relief. He had escaped. So is that really how Frederick Douglass escaped? Is this book accurate? Now, the book on the first thing I would do is I would actually show the students the picture book. We'd talk about who the author was, right? So we know it's a pretty good source, but we're not always sure whether some of the information is made up. So what I could, if I was using let's go ahead and escape out of here. If I'm using a traditional Google search, let's just go to google.com. Now, you may have to use a different search engine because Google's starting to change and use AI more in there. So I would go find a search engine that is not using AI very much. And I would just search Frederick Douglass. Let's see, escape from slavery. Okay. And you can look, it's trying to give me all kinds of suggestions here, right? My escape from slavery. I'm guessing that's some kind of resource, right? Maybe that's a book that exists, but I don't want that. I'm trying to find out the story here. And so now I'm doing a traditional search. Oh, and it's got a book here by Frederick Douglass. I actually don't know that one. So that's interesting. I didn't know he had published that book. Frederick Douglass has 3 autobiographies. I already know that he published during his lifetime. Some of them we read in U.S. schools, his first biography that he wrote. And so I'm looking at sources. And so now I'm looking to see, are these credible sources, right? I'm going to tell my students to ignore some of this over here. It looks like it's trying to sell me a book with a similar name. This is the National Constitution Center. I know this is a credible source. History.com, this is a pretty credible source. The Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, I know about too, is a pretty credible source. I don't know this Human Trafficking Institute, but it looks okay. So what I'm doing now is I'm looking through and I'm just going to pick one to search. So let me go ahead and click on the National Constitution Center and we can start reading about what happened. So it gives us a date when he was searching. Right off the bat, we know that he was aided by a disguise and job skills he had learned while in Baltimore shipyard. So this actually checks out with some of the information. He posed as a sailor and he grabbed a train from Baltimore to Philadelphia. He was given papers from a freed black sailor to help in the journey. And so this is a quote from him so we know he talked about this in his autobiographies. So we have some good information. So far this is starting to check out. By the way, another thing I always point out to students, we also have an image, right, that shows us more information. This is it shows us what it looks like, how people dressed. And so I wonder if that information is correct too. So this site is giving us some pretty good information. It's not very detailed though. So we do know that generally some of the things are true, but I might go try another source and see if I can find some more true information. Okay, so this is again showing us the September 3rd, 1838 day. And this is telling us kind of as a narrative how nervous he was. And so I'm going to kind of scroll through, oops, get rid of this pop-up, see if I can find other information. So by the way, notice how I'm talking through while I'm doing it. This is exactly how I would do it with students. I would use it as think aloud. I would tell them my thinking process, that I'm not reading necessarily every word. I'm trying to skim through the articles to find the information that's most important to me. So let's see. So it looks like this is leading us all the way up to the time. So look at this. We actually are getting the quotes from the article. I suppose you have your free papers. No, sir, I never carry my free papers with me, but you have something to show you're a free man or have not. So it's pretty close. So this is a little bit of a different quote. So it looks like it's not exactly the same. And this tells us more about the free papers. So it looks like this is pretty accurate. Although, I don't see the quote from the article about, I don't think you'd like it much in these parts. I don't see anything about that. There's nothing about how the conductor treated him. So I want to know more about that. So anyway, you can see that we're getting pretty decent information. So a traditional Google search is leading us to some good sources that could allow us to investigate it. All right. So let's see what happens if we search with AI. So let's go Frederick Douglass. I'm going to change this question to what happened during Frederick Douglass's escape from slavery. All right. And so I'm going to change the question. The reason is that when I use search, I'm usually searching keywords, but now I'm going to go to this AI mode function. And so now we're using an AI chatbot to search. And so I like using it from Google because, again, they're well known for search. And now look at it right off the bat. It's giving me the answer. It's authoritative. It looks good. So let's look and see what it says. Frederick Douglass escaped from slavery on September 3rd, 1838. He disguised himself as a free black sailor going from Baltimore to Maryland. Okay, this is interesting. Backstory, he'd failed to do it. He dressed in a sailor's uniform. Okay, this looks correct. So it looks like his fiance, who he would later marry, was helping him with the money for it. And then it goes into the details of it. But you know what? This is really interesting. But another thing I can do with Gen AI that's interesting is let me just go to AI mode and start a new search here. Hold on. I'm going to start. Here's another thing that you can do with students. You can show them that's a little different. So say you're on social media and you see this claim. I'm just going to do a screenshot of this page right here. And I'm actually just going to drop the image into here. So let me upload the image. My desktop, I can pull it in. I don't even have to ask it a question. I can just drop it in and see how it does with the search. So this is very different than a traditional Google search. So look at this. It tells me the picture book. Guess what, everyone? This is the wrong picture book. This is not correct, right? So it's right off the bat, it gives me that incorrect information, including the illustrator. I've actually seen it always seems to get the picture book wrong when you give it this information. So this is a great thing for students to see that it's not always accurate. But the thing I wanted to do is actually look at the information here. So it talks about the disguise, the papers that he used, the confrontation. Then it talks about what happens next. But the thing we should do here, if we're teaching students to use AI, is it actually is giving us some sources. And look where the sources are from: Facebook, and YouTube. Oh, I think I can do better than that. So I'm going to ask some follow-up questions here. Were the quotes real on the page? Let's see what it tells me. Okay, so now it's telling me the actual quote. So notice how I didn't just take the first answer. Now I'm digging in with follow-up questions, and oh my gosh, look at this now. It's now pulling from a lot more sources that I can investigate. And you can look here that it pulls from sources that you can go investigate. So this comes from some site called the History Page that's posted on Facebook. We don't want to dismiss Facebook because it could be a quality source that's posting there, but I don't know what the History Page is. So that's not the source that I want to look at. So let me go back to my sources here, see what else I can find. Okay, is this my first source or is this the second one I got to here? Sorry, I got to get back off of the Facebook page. There we go. Okay. Yeah, here we go. Here's the back to my page here. So I can kind of look through it. So it says, this is accurate, but I'm trying to find where. It says these are accurate quotes, but it's not telling me where they come from, right? Where did these quotes come from? So notice how I'm not just looking at the first one. I'm following up with additional sources and continuing to look. So Douglas wrote biographies. So for security reasons, Douglas hid the specific details of how he escaped in his first two books so he wouldn't compromise the safety of the Underground Railroad who helped him. He finally revealed the exact train disguise in his 1881 biography. So it actually tells me the exact biography where I can go find these quotes and click on them. So you notice how AI can be useful in going and finding some specific details. And look, I'm starting to get some sources I like a little better. School Library Journal is a academic source that I could go to. And you notice how asking follow-up questions allows me to click around. And now I need to go and maybe look at what it's actually quoting here, right? And so you're noticing you can go find these specific sources. So the short point here is what you should do is work through this process with students using both SIFT and then using the SIFT for AI method and show them how both of those models can look. So in this case, I'm not needing to just find out whether the source is correct. I'm actually doing a bunch of follow-up questions and going through and filling out these and seeing what did each search come up with and what was different in each search, and then reflecting on it can help students think about when would be the appropriate times to use each one. So this is kind of how I recommend using it with students. And one thing you'll notice is that if you could do this throughout the school year, when a question comes up you don't know the answer to, or you're not sure whether you trust, you can go in and you could try having one side of the room try a Google search. What did you find? Another side of the room doing a search with some kind of chatbot. What did you find? And then showing them those steps. Okay, did you ask a follow-up question? Did you go look at the sources? Did you go back to it? And let them go through that process and practice it, and then kind of push them. And this is a process that just takes time. It's not something you can teach over one time. So I recommend doing it when questions come up in the class and using think alouds to kind of walk through it. And so you could do this with any content in your classroom. What's some content that students would come up in your classroom? It could be a conspiracy theory you want to investigate. It could just be coming up with something factual. But I've been doing this with my students, and we just stop and I give myself I'll give myself, let's take 7 minutes to do this in class and see what we can find. And we do our best to search because that's more realistic to what they could do in their own life. And so I hope that kind of approach is a little bit helpful to thinking through how you can do some of these things. But I'd love to take some questions and hear some ideas of how you think you could use that approach.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Krutka, for such a thoughtful and timely presentation. And I think many of us are living with not only new ideas, but also new questions. And honestly, that's probably a good sign in media literacy work. We'll now move into our Q&A session. So dear participants, feel free to type your questions in the chat, or alternatively, you can unmute yourselves and ask your questions directly. And we have a comment from Natalia. It's a good idea to use when students get ready with reports. Yes. And while you are preparing your questions, maybe Dan, we'd love to begin with our own questions.
Oh, yeah, indeed. I just wanted to add something to what Professor Krutka just said. So I wanted to ask him about how can teachers make the invisible systems that personalize information more visible to students. But I think he provided us with an excellent search online. I really like the way he sifted through the information, and it's really cool. So yeah, I think that's the way to proceed. The way you did it, like you search online, the engine will churn out some information, then you will add more filters to it. So that's the way to do it, because it makes visible what might be invisible at first. So that was one. It's not a question, it's a comment I wanted to make. So thank you very much, Dr. Krutka.
I'll also share real quick. I added in the let me see. I think I've got it up right here. I added in the chat a site that is really helpful if you want to understand how AI works better. It's called Equity in AI, and there's all these activities you can do where you can like have people go and put things into AI and then discuss what comes out of it. One of my favorite ones is there's a token activity in here I'm trying to find that I really like because what you do is it gives you instructions. Here, this next token, whose truth? Is one of my favorite activities because what it does is you go it shows you how to give prompt the search engine or chat bots to tell you what word comes next in a phrase, and you could enter different things in and you can try it on different chatbots, and what you'll see is that it'll generate different words using when you use different chatbots. And so it shows students how what AI is doing is guessing with probabilities the next word that should come up. It doesn't know the answer. It doesn't think like humans. And so this shows you the variability. So I'll put a link to that in the chat. It's one of my favorite activities to do with students to get them to understand better how AI is generating text.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question, Dr. Krutka, if you could redesign just one aspect of today's education system to better prepare students for an algorithm-driven world, what would you change first?
Well, I'm a big believer. A lot of the work I've done is that we need to spend more time thinking about technologies, not just using them, right? So these activities are geared towards thinking about what are these technologies doing and do they align with our values, right? I think it's both a question of of like understanding them and then making decisions about them. So the big question that I've asked in my research is what relationships do we want with technologies, right? As an example, this is not just about AI, right? AI is the new technology that's very influential. But for example, I always tell my students, I live in Texas where everyone drives cars, but I don't like what cars do to my life. I prefer walking. I prefer riding bikes. I feel like it's a better experience. So I don't have a car. And I prefer, so to me, these are all ethical decisions we should all be thinking about and making all the time. So I'd hope we'd focus more on asking those questions and letting students investigate them. And there aren't right answers. They're moral questions.
Thank you. Dr. Krutka, in your opinion, what is the biggest misconception educators currently have about AI and media literacy?
Oh, that's a great question. I think probably the biggest problem is like the binary thinking that's happening where it's either people are like AI is great and we should all be using this, or AI is awful and we should never be touching this. I think we have to be a little more nuanced in helping students navigate the world that they're in. And so I think getting away from the extremes and just letting students dig into it is the best thing you can do. And again, this doesn't even mean you have to use the products. It means you can examine them without using them. So I would say that the biggest problems I see is just from the people that don't want to have the conversation. I think it's really important that we do so.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Thank you very much. Okay.
No black or white side, but 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't go towards, like it's okay to come to the conclusion that you don't think AI is a good technology you should use, but you got to learn about it. You still have to learn about it, right? To better understand it. Because sometimes when you come down on those hard perspectives, you quit learning. And then it's hard to understand why someone would choose to use it in a specific situation. In reality, I think over time, AI is going to settle in to having a role that's a lot smaller than what a lot of these companies want, which they want it to take over education. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we'll find spaces where it's useful and spaces where it's not.
Yes, thank you so much. Dan, do you have any questions?
Honestly, not at this point, but I totally enjoyed the presentation and the fact that Dr. Krutka came up with legit advice on how to use all sorts of tools. And I like the fact that he pinpoints the moral perspective. Always think about technology in terms of your own values and the ethical systems out there. And this is very important, yeah, because you can. It's also a way of scrutinizing questions that you would never ask yourself unless you know unless you're in you're faced up with a certain life situation. But no, we should always think ethically about technology. Why do I use this tool? What's its what is it made for? And always try to think in terms of the ethical values involved. So thank you, Dr. Krutka.
Hey, thank you for having me. And again, if you have any follow up questions, you can follow this work at Civics of Tech, but also we have a contact page there. That's an easy way to get a hold of me if you have questions. I'm always happy to answer them.
Thank you once again, Dr. Krutka, for joining us and for such an engaging discussion and for sharing all those useful links with us. And thank you to all participants for being part of this first session of our Force Informed Voices webinar series. And we truly hope that today's conversation encourages all of us to think more critically about the technologies shaping our classrooms and our students' realities. And then,
thank you personally, Dr. Krutka. I would like to thank everyone for being part of this conversation today. I think that media literacy today is not only about understanding messages, it is about understanding the systems shaping those messages. And Dr. Krutka has just helped us in this regard. We are truly grateful you joined us, Dr. Krutka, and we hope to see you in our next session.
and please don't forget to complete the quiz. I have shared the link in the chat. It makes you eligible for the certificate. And also, have a wonderful evening, everyone. And we hope to see you again soon. And we have our famous slogan. Till then, as usual, stay curious, stay informed, and stay media literate. So bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.